Alright, we're back out today, and we got some rain this morning. I purposely left the boat open because I wanted to see how water ran, where it got stuck, um, how much water was retained through everything, just because it's good to know. Um, so the floor is a little bit wet, but it was a lot more wet this morning, so it dries up pretty quickly. I do have a tarp that once I get everything set up, I'm gonna put over this to keep the water out, but I just wanted to double check how water would react to being inside the boat. I don't have any puddles. It was pretty heavy rain. Don't have any puddles or anything like that. So that's good. And everything in the compartments stayed pretty dry. So now today's mission is to start the final wiring of the boat and mounting everything. So I'm going to cut the hole in the side of the console for my wiring, I guess you can call it wiring tube that's coming from the front of the boat to go into the console, do the final wiring of the switches, get everything set up. So that all I have to do is connect batteries. I did get the wrong circuit breaker for the motor. The motor pulls like 58 amps, and I got a 70 amp breaker, which you can see in here. So I ordered a 60 amp breaker instead. So let me get to it.
So today I was thinking about how to best show the wiring that I'm going to be using on the boat. So I'm pulling up my high-tech wiring diagram software, and I just figured I would draw it out for you. Now, this is a diagram of the boat, the center console, the rear bench seat, the front bench seat. Now, this is the accessory wiring diagram, and then I have another diagram that I'll show you guys for the main power in the motor. So at the front bench, under the front bench seat, there is my house battery. Within the system for the accessories, I have two negative bus bars, one at the console and one at the front seat. So basically all I did was run a negative wire connecting the two negative buses, and then the front bus is connected to the battery negative. So that now both these buses are grounded to the house battery negative. The next thing that I did was I took the negatives from the two bow lights and ran them to my negative bus up under the seat, as well as the negative from the Bluetooth receiver that powers the speakers here is all to the bus under the front seat, and then that bus is obviously wired to the negative of the battery. Now for the positives on those three, on my bow lights and my Bluetooth receiver, the positives are going to be run for the nav lights. They're going to be run down and around with the rest of the wires, and they're going to go into switch 1 on my console. So I have both positives running full length to switch 1, as well as from the rear I have the positive for my stern light running to switch 1. And then what'll happen is I then ran a positive lead from the battery, from the house battery, through the PVC to my fuse panel. Then I will run a positive lead from the fuse panel to the other side of switch 1. So now all my nav lights have power and they're connected at switch 1. So when I flip the switch, all three lights will come on. The next switch I'm using is the switch 2. I'm running it for my speakers, my Bluetooth radio. So again, the Bluetooth negative is already hooked to this bus, which is run to the battery. So now I took the positive, I ran it down along the outside, I ran it to switch 2, and same process. Take a positive feed from the fuse box and hook it on the other side of switch 2. So now my Bluetooth speaker is hooked up. The last thing on switch 3 was my depth finder, my Lowrance Mark IV. So that negative runs directly to the bus, the negative bus underneath the console, and then the positive for my depth finder runs to switch 3, which is fed from another line coming from the fuse box, so that when I flip the switch, my depth finder will come on. So that's the basic wiring of the accessories on the boat. So now I'm going to bring up my other diagram here and kind of draw it out for you. So this is the main power and batteries. like I've stated previously, I'm using a 24 volt motor, so I have two 12 volt batteries wired together. You connect the positive and the negative sides of the batteries, and then that will give you an open positive and an open negative terminal at 24 volts. So I am going to run a positive lead to my 60 amp breaker, and then out of my 60 amp breaker it's going to run to my battery cutoff switch, which I use as a quote-unquote ignition switch. Then from the other side of the battery switch, it's going to run into my amp draw gauge. My amp draw gauge is a inline gauge, which means that it has two terminals, and it's weird because on the back of the gauge it actually says positive and negative, but that's not how you wire an amp draw gauge. You wire it with the positive feed coming straight through. So I'm going back on topic. I drew this all wrong. I'm running the positive of the battery to the 60 amp breaker to the battery cutoff switch, and then out of the battery cutoff switch it goes to my amp draw gauge, and then from there that is where it runs directly down to the motor. So now I have positive 24 volts going to the motor. Now the next thing is the negative. So my negative terminal is actually just going to be directly connected to the motor itself. And now the next thing that I have to wire up is my battery gauge, which will show me my charge status, and also mine has how long the motor's been running for in hours. So for this one, there is a two positive leads and a negative lead coming off the battery gauge. So the negative lead that goes into the back of the gauge actually just connects directly to the negative of the battery. Then you have a positive, which is the gauge's power source, which is one color. That I am also going to hook to my on-off switch. And then you actually have a positive that reads the draw. You're supposed to set it up on the load side. So again, those two positives are going to be connected to my power switch. So that basically, from my battery cutoff switch, I have an amp draw gauge running that runs directly to the power supply for the motor, and then I have two leads that are running to my battery monitoring gauge. So that when this switch is in the off position, neither the amp draw gauge nor the battery gauge will turn on, and that will give me a cutoff, and no charge will be coming out of these batteries, no discharge I should say, when this is in the off position. Now the other thing that both of them do have, just the amp draw gauge, the amp draw gauge has a positive and negative wire for lighting. It's a little backlit, has a little bulb in the back to light up the gauge because it is an analog gauge. So with this, the negative is going to be run to my negative bus that's in my console. So that'll go to the negative bus, and the positive is actually going to be run to my nav light switch. So when I flick the switch to turn my nav lights on at night, the amp draw gauge will also light up as well. So yeah, that's how I'm going to wire up this motor. I figured this would be an easier way of demonstrating it rather than trying to video me doing it live outside on the boat. So thanks for watching. Hope this helped.